My name is Dorothy Miller, and yesterday I discovered that for 10 years I had been nothing more than a human ATM to my own son. While my husband lay in a hospital bed needing $150,000 heart surgery to survive, my son refused to help, claiming he was tight on cash after buying his wife another designer bag. That was the moment I finally woke up from this nightmare. And I am wondering, where would this happen in your world? Tell me your city or country in the comments. Subscribe for more. So here's what happened next. I am 65 years old, and I just made the most liberating decision of my life. I picked up that thin piece of plastic, a bank card that had felt heavier than 1,000 pounds for 10 years, and instead of walking to the ATM like I'd done every single month, I locked it away in the deepest corner of my desk drawer. Today marks the first day I stopped making mortgage payments on my son Christopher's dream house. Outside my window, the California sunshine warmed my small garden of flowers and herbs. The light was gentle, but my heart felt like it was drowning in ice-cold water, torn between sharp anxiety and an almost cruel sense of freedom. That house had once been everything I was proud of. 10 years ago, Christopher stood before Robert and me, holding hands with his girlfriend Claudia, his eyes bright with dreams. "Dad, Mom, we're ready to move up in the world. We found this amazing 3,000 square foot house in Hillcrest Heights. The views are incredible, and it is in the best school district. We're thinking about our future baby." The baby, he mentioned, little Felicity, was still safe inside Claudia's belly. Robert and I looked at each other, seeing both pride and worry in our eyes. We were just ordinary retired folks who had already emptied our savings to help them buy their first small apartment downtown. "So, how much would you need for the down payment?" Robert asked carefully. The number Christopher said still haunts me today. It hit me like a punch to the gut, knocking all the air out of my lungs. Robert went quiet and started smoking one cigarette after another. Claudia stood there with her perfect smile, gently rubbing her small belly. "Mom, it is really all for the child. Christopher's company is growing, so his salary will go up soon. It is just that right now. We're short on the down payment, and those monthly payments would be pretty high." Her phrase, "for the child," struck precisely at my most vulnerable spot. "How much are you short?" I heard my own voice ask, sounding parched and brittle. "We need another $80,000 for the down payment," Christopher replied, jumping into the conversation. "The mortgage payments would be about $1,800 a month. Dad, Mom, if you could help us handle the mortgage payments. I'll definitely take over once I get promoted to manager in a couple of years." $1,800. Robert's and my Social Security benefits combined barely covered that amount. That night, neither of us slept a wink. "Let's sell this old house," Robert sighed into the darkness. "We can't just watch our children struggle like this. If we sell it, where would we live?" I asked reflexively. "We could rent something smaller in the suburbs, something more affordable," Robert said, trying to sound casual, but I could hear the reluctance in his voice. This old house, though worn and dated, held a lifetime of our memories. In the end, we didn't sell the house. We couldn't bear to part with it. Instead, we withdrew all of our retirement savings and borrowed from several old friends until we managed to scrape together the $80,000 needed for the down payment gap. Then, gritting my teeth, I told my son, "Mom will help you with the mortgage payments for now." At that moment, the light in my son's eyes and the radiant smile that bloomed across my daughter-in-law's face made me feel that everything was worthwhile. I believed I was purchasing family harmony, my son's gratitude, and a solid foundation for our family. Little did I know that I was placing golden shackles around my own wrists, heavy chains that I would wear for the next 10 years. The first few years were filled with hope and optimism. Robert and I lived frugally, with my Social Security check covering the mortgage, while his handled our living expenses and gradually paid back the money we had borrowed for the down payment. Life was tight, but our hearts remained warm. We would visit Hillcrest Heights from time to see how they were settling in. The house was truly beautiful, spacious and bright, with a backyard large enough to host parties. Christopher and Claudia welcomed us warmly, and little Felicity took her first wobbling steps across the gleaming hardwood floors, her delighted giggles filling the spacious rooms. During those early days, I felt that all the sacrifice was justified. However, gradually, the atmosphere began to shift in subtle ways. As our visits became more frequent, Claudia's conversation started carrying different undertones. "Mom, don't you think this sofa looks a bit worn? It doesn't really match the decor anymore." Mrs. Anderson downstairs just got this gorgeous leather set from her son. "It looks so elegant. Christopher works so hard, and I'd love to get him a massage chair." It is just that, well, money's been a bit tight lately. At first, I either didn't understand these hints or chose not to acknowledge them. That changed one afternoon when I overheard Claudia in the kitchen, her voice pitched just loud enough to carry into the living room. They're always here looking around and touching everything, like they're conducting some kind of inspection. They can't really help with anything. They just get in the way. My coffee cup froze halfway to my lips. Christopher mumbled something in response that I couldn't make out. After that incident, I visited much less frequently. Robert's health began deteriorating with high blood pressure and heart disease. Medical expenses became a significant burden, even with Medicare coverage. Our financial situation became increasingly precarious. I tentatively broached the subject with Christopher once, mentioning that Dad's medication costs were becoming expensive, and that next month's mortgage payment might be. Before I could finish, Christopher's voice turned sharp with panic on the other end of the phone. "Mom, you can't stop those payments. The bank will foreclose if you do. Claudia and I would lose our credit completely. Felicity needs to stay in this school district." The anxiety and accusation in his tone pierced my heart like a needle. He didn't ask a single question about how his father was feeling, nor did he offer to help find a solution for the shortfall. All he could think about was his house, his credit score, and his daughter's school district. I remained silent for a long moment before finally saying, "I understand." After hanging up, I looked at Robert coughing in bed and realized with startling clarity that our health and well-being ranked lower in our son's priorities than his mortgage payments. The months that followed moved like clockwork, mechanical and repetitive. On the first of every month, without fail, I would go to the bank and transfer $1,800. Watching the ATM screen display transaction successful, I felt as though a piece of my heart was being carved away each time. Robert's condition continued to fluctuate with hospital admissions, discharges, and readmissions. Our savings had long since evaporated, and we began depleting what little remained in his accounts. What about Christopher and his family? They upgraded to luxury cars while Claudia's Instagram feed showcased weekend dining at upscale restaurants, family trips to Disneyland and Europe, and photos of new designer handbags and jewelry. They lived in style and comfort. Meanwhile, Robert and I remained in our aging home, counting every penny and struggling to maintain the foundation of their glamorous lifestyle through that 3,000-square-foot castle in the air. Sometimes our elderly neighbors would say with envy, "Dorothy, you are so blessed to have such a successful son living in that beautiful big house." I could only manage a strained smile, my mouth filled with bitterness. Blessed? Would you want this kind of blessing if it were offered to you? The real turning point came last month. Robert suffered a severe heart attack requiring immediate bypass surgery. The procedure would cost $150,000. After searching through every savings account, checking account, and counting the cash hidden throughout our home, we fell far short with less than $50,000 total. With trembling hands, I called Christopher. "Mom, what is wrong?" "I am in the middle of a meeting," he said in a low, irritated voice. "That much?" His tone was strained. "I've got all my money tied up in project investments right now, and Claudia, well, you know she just bought several designer bags, so her funds are tied up too." Designer bags? Were they worth $150,000? Could they save your father's life? These questions burned in my throat, but I couldn't force them out. "Christopher, I am begging you. Your father's life is at stake," I was practically pleading. "Mom, don't panic. Let me think of something. Maybe, could you consider using your house as collateral?" Once again, he suggested our home. This time, it was to save his own father's life. My heart turned completely cold. In the end, it was several old friends and my daughter Jennifer, who lived out of state, who worked through the night to gather the money and wire it to us, allowing us to pay for the surgery. The operation was successful, and Robert survived. He lay weakly in the hospital bed, holding my hand with his cloudy eyes gazing at me. "Dorothy, you've suffered so much. That house. Stop supporting it." Jennifer stood nearby, wiping away tears, speaking with unprecedented anger. "Mom, is Christopher even human anymore? You and Dad have been drained dry by that house. Has he ever cared? What kind of life have you been living these past 10 years? My daughter's words struck like a final hammer blow, shattering all my remaining hesitation and illusions. Yes, 10 years had passed. Robert and I had poured out our life's blood. What had we received in return? We had earned Christopher's sense of entitlement, Claudia's disdain, and a precarious retirement where we couldn't even afford proper medical care. I gazed out the hospital window at the city's neon lights flickering in the distance. That house in Hillcrest Heights stood somewhere in this city, brightly illuminated. It had become like a massive parasite feeding off Robert's and my very lives. Upper scar etched into my heart. 10 full years, 120 months, $216,000. This didn't even include the $80,000 down payment loan, which we had eventually managed to repay. I closed the statement and locked it in the drawer alongside the bank card for reclosure. Once this thought took root, it became impossible to suppress. I understood exactly what this decision. It would destroy Christopher's credit, potentially result in the bank seizing their beautiful house, force Felicity to change schools, and completely shatter the carefully crafted image that Christopher's family had worked so hard to maintain. There would be countless accusations and blame directed at me. I would be called a heartless mother, an irresponsible grandmother. But I no longer cared about any of that. Robert's and my lives were more important than their social standing. The first month after stopping payments passed quietly. Christopher probably assumed I was just having temporary financial difficulties and would catch up the following month. He didn't even call to check on us. By the second month, I began receiving collection notices from the bank via text message. Since my number was listed as an emergency contact, I glanced at them and ignored them completely. Early in the third month, Christopher's call finally came. When I answered, he skipped all pleasantries and got straight to the point, his voice tight with anxiety. "Mom, what is going on? The bank just called me. They said we're 2 months behind on the mortgage. Why didn't you make the transfer?" I stood on the balcony holding the phone, watching my jasmine flowers bloom with their sweet fragrance. "I didn't make the payment," I said, surprised by how calm my own voice sounded. "Why not?" Christopher's voice rose sharply. "Mom, this isn't something to joke about. This could be catastrophic." "I know," I replied simply. "Christopher, your mother and father don't have any more money. If you don't have money, then figure something out, borrow from Jennifer or someone. Or maybe you could take out a home equity loan on that old house." There it was again, the same tired refrain. "I am not borrowing anymore, and I am not taking out any loans," I interrupted him. "Your father just barely survived, and we need to keep our money and our home for our own care in our final years." The line went completely silent, as though he had never considered that I might say such a thing. After a long pause, his tone softened into pleading. "Mom, I am begging you, please. Just this once, find a way to help us through this, and when I get my quarterly bonus." "It has been 10 years, Christopher," I said quietly, cutting off his empty promises. "Every quarter you say next time. Every year you say next year. I've been waiting for 10 tomorrows." My voice remained steady, but it carried an unmistakable note of finality. "I've been paying this mortgage for 10 years, and starting today, I am done. This is your house, so you figure out your own solution." "Figure out our own solution? How are we supposed to do that? $1,800 a month. You are trying to destroy us." Christopher finally dropped all pretense and began shouting into the phone. "Destroy you." I repeated those words, feeling the last traces of warmth in my heart freeze solid. "When your father was lying on the operating table waiting for money to save his life, and you refused to help, weren't you trying to destroy him?" The line went dead silent. I could only hear heavy breathing. I hung up the phone. My hands were shaking slightly, but in my heart, it felt as though a massive stone that had been crushing me for 10 years had suddenly been lifted away. The days that followed unfolded exactly as I had expected. Christopher called repeatedly, followed by Claudia, taking turns bombarding me with calls. They progressed from initial anger and accusations through desperate pleading to finally attempting moral manipulation. "Mom, you can't be so heartless. Think about your own granddaughter. Mom, we know we were wrong, and we promise to be good to you from now on." "Mrs. Miller," Claudia said, using that title for the first time. "Please, for the child's sake, have some mercy." I remained unmoved by all of it. After 10 years, I had heard too many of their promises and pledges of future devotion. Jennifer supported my decision completely. "Mom, you should have done this years ago. Christopher and his family have been completely spoiled by you." Though Robert was concerned, he squeezed my hand and said, "Whatever you decide is right for this family." I knew that the storm was still building. By the 4th month of missed payments, the bank issued an official foreclosure notice. Christopher and his family could no longer hold on. They would have to move out before the foreclosure and find alternative housing. On a Friday evening, Christopher called me once more. This time, his voice carried an unprecedented weariness and defeat. "Mom," he said, then fell silent. I waited. "We're moving tomorrow," he said, his voice hoarse. "We found a rental." "I see," I responded. "Could you and Dad come see us tomorrow?" He paused, then added, "Felicity misses you both." I suspected this wasn't really about Felicity missing us, but rather their final attempt to use emotional manipulation to change my mind, or perhaps they simply wanted us to witness their reduced circumstances as proof of my mistake. I had no desire to go, but Robert said, "Let's go. He is still our son, and she is still our granddaughter. We should see how they're settling in just for our own peace of mind." Next day, Robert and I followed the address Christopher had sent and found their new place. It was in an aging apartment complex the hallways were cluttered with debris, and the walls showed signs of wear and neglect. Christopher had rented a unit on the 3rd floor. There was an elevator, but it frequently broke down. "We rang the doorbell," Christopher answered, wearing an old polo shirt with disheveled hair and bloodshot eyes. He looked like he hadn't slept properly in days. His once confident face now bore the unmistakable marks of exhaustion and defeat. When he saw us, his lips moved soundlessly for a moment before he silently stepped aside to let us in. The apartment was small, probably less than 1,000 square feet, dim and cramped. The living room was filled with boxes of various sizes that hadn't been completely unpacked yet. The air carried a stale, musty odor. Claudia sat on a small stool, pulling clothes from boxes with a stormy expression. When she noticed us, she barely glanced up, let out an almost inaudible snort of disdain, then returned to roughly handling the clothing. My granddaughter Felicity, who should be in 4th grade now, was curled up on a worn sofa watching cartoons on a small, old-fashioned television set. When she saw us, she called out shyly, "Grandpa, Grandma." At that moment, something twisted painfully in my chest. This environment was worlds apart from her previous home, with its large picture windows, big screen television, and dedicated playroom. "Dad, Mom, please sit down," Christopher said, gesturing toward the rickety, looking old sofa. Robert and I sat down carefully. The atmosphere was so tense you could have wrung water from it. "Are you all settled in?" Robert asked, breaking the silence. How settled could we possibly be? Claudia's head snapped up, her voice sharp and bitter. "This tiny place can't even hold all our belongings. It is suffocating. How are we supposed to live like this? All because of... She didn't finish the sentence, but her gaze cut through me like a blade. Christopher snapped at her irritably. Could you just keep quiet for once? Why should I keep quiet? Why can't I speak the truth? Claudia exploded like a lit firecracker. If your mother hadn't been so heartless about stopping the payments, would we be living in this awful place? What about Felicity's education? I am completely humiliated, she began sobbing hysterically. Felicity, frightened by the outburst, started crying as well. The small apartment descended into chaos. Christopher buried his head in his hands and crouched on the floor, saying nothing. I watched this scene of domestic turmoil unfold before me, observing my son's defeated posture after being battered by life's realities, witnessing my daughter, in-law's hysteria, and my granddaughter's frightened helplessness. I felt neither the satisfaction I might have expected, nor any trace of sympathy, only a profound sadness that seemed to penetrate my very bones. In the midst of the chaos, Robert began coughing heavily. His complexion didn't look good. I quickly poured him a glass of water. Christopher looked up, noticing his father's gray hair and haggard appearance, and something flickered in his eyes. Claudia's sobs also quieted somewhat, though her shoulders continued to shake. Christopher, I began, my voice clear and steady in the cramped space. I didn't come here today to gloat over your misfortune. Everyone turned to look at me. I came to see whether you could survive without that house that required draining your parents' life savings to maintain. I paused, letting my gaze sweep over both my son and daughter-in-law. I can see now that you can survive. You are just not living as comfortably as before. Claudia started to protest, but was silenced by Christopher's warning look. I know you both hate me, I continued calmly. You think I am cruel and that I've destroyed your lives. But Christopher, Claudia, have you ever considered where that glamorous lifestyle of yours came from? It came from your father and me scraping together $1,800 every single month for 10 years from money we could barely spare. It came from us being afraid to get sick, afraid to die, afraid to enjoy anything while we carried that burden for you. My voice rose slightly as 10 years of suppressed frustration and anger finally found an outlet. For 10 years, while you were buying new cars, taking vacations, and purchasing luxury goods, did you ever think about your father taking the cheapest medications available? For 10 years, while you were laughing and enjoying yourselves in that spacious, beautiful house, did you ever consider that your mother was lying awake at night worrying about next month's mortgage payment? When your father was lying on an operating table, waiting for money to save his life, and you made excuses and suggested we sell our home, did you remember that we are your parents? I recounted each incident, every slight, with calm precision. No screaming, no tears, but every word struck like a slap across my sons' and daughter-in-law's faces. Christopher's head sank lower and lower. Claudia's expression transformed from anger to pallor, finally showing traces of shame. Mom, please stop. Christopher's voice was choked with emotion. No, I need to say this. I looked directly at him. Christopher, I am your mother. I gave birth to you, raised you, put you through college, and helped you start your adult life. I don't owe you anything, and that house was never my responsibility. Your father and I are old now. We've completed our duties. The rest of the journey is yours to walk. I stood up and took a check from my purse. It represented the last of our savings, combined with what remained from the surgery fund that Jennifer and friends had contributed, $80,000 total. I placed it on the creaky old coffee table. Take this $80,000, I said. It is not for mortgage payments or luxuries. It is an education fund for Felicity and emergency money for your family. Whether you use it to find work or start a small business, you'll need some capital. Christopher stared at the check as if it had burned him, then looked up with red-rimmed eyes. Mom, I am so sorry for what I've put you and Dad through. He finally spoke the words that were 10 years overdue. Tears streamed down his face as this 35-year-old man cried like a child. Claudia also lowered her head and began weeping quietly. This is your life to live, I said finally. How you choose to live it depends entirely on you. This apartment isn't shameful. What is shameful is having perfectly good hands and feet, but choosing to leech off elderly parents instead of standing on your own. I helped Robert to his feet. Let's go home. As we emerged from that dim apartment, walked down the narrow hallway, and stepped back into the sunlight, I took a deep breath. The early summer air carried the scent of fresh grass. It was wonderful. Robert looked at me with concern. You gave them all our money. What about us? I took his arm and smiled. We have Social Security, we have Medicare, and we have our old house. We won't go hungry, and we can afford medical care when we need it. That is enough. Yes, it was enough. Having removed those golden shackles, I discovered how blue the sky truly was, how warm the sunshine felt. My jasmine flowers bloomed with exceptional fragrance that year. Later, Christopher came to visit us several times. These weren't visits filled with complaints and requests for money, but genuine visits to see how we were doing. He brought fruit and clumsily helped Robert repair the radio that had been broken for months. He told us he had quit his previous job, which had seemed prestigious but provided unstable income. Using part of the $80,000 as startup capital, he had partnered with a friend to open a small design studio. Though the work was demanding, the income was more reliable than before. Claudia came once as well. She didn't say much, but she quietly helped me clean the house and prepared a meal for us. The food wasn't exceptional, but her attitude had softened considerably. I knew the wounds were still there and would need time to heal properly. But at least this was a beginning. The beginning of their journey as truly independent adults. The beginning of Robert's and my life lived truly for ourselves. On weekends, Jennifer would visit with her daughter, and our extended family would gather in our small old house to share meals and conversation. The house was small, but it was filled with warmth. The laughter was genuine. Last night, I had a dream. In it, there was no suffocating 3,000 square foot house weighing us down. There were just the four of us, many years ago, crowded into that small apartment with Christopher and Jennifer fighting over the television remote, while Robert and I bustled around the kitchen preparing dinner. Even the smell of cooking oil carried the comforting essence of ordinary family life. I woke up with damp cheeks, but my heart felt peaceful. Stopping the mortgage payments wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of a new chapter in Robert's and my twilight years. It was also the beginning of my son's family being forced to mature and learn responsibility. The price had been steep, but fortunately, it wasn't too late. The months that followed brought unexpected developments. Christopher's design studio began to flourish, and he discovered talents he never knew he possessed when he wasn't living under the crushing weight of that oversized mortgage. Claudia found work as a part-time bookkeeper for a local small business, contributing to their household income for the first time in years. They moved to a slightly larger apartment in a working-class neighborhood, where Felicity made friends with children whose families understood the value of hard work and modest living. The girl seemed happier, more grounded, less entitled than she had been in her previous environment. One autumn afternoon, 6 months after our confrontation in that cramped first apartment, Christopher appeared at our door carrying a small potted plant. "It is for your garden, Mom," he said simply. Claudia picked it out. She said she remembered how much you love your flowers. We sat on the old porch, drinking coffee from chipped mugs that had served us faithfully for decades. The conversation flowed naturally, without the undercurrent of tension that had poisoned our relationship for so long. "I want you to know," Christopher said quietly, "that I understand now what we put you through. Not just the money, but the way we treated you, like you existed only to serve our needs." I said nothing, letting him continue. "I look at Felicity now, and I think about what kind of person I want her to become. I don't want her to think the world. I want her to know the satisfaction of earning what she has." Robert, who had been listening from his favorite chair, nodded approvingly. His health had stabilized since we'd been able to afford his medications properly, and the stress lines around his eyes had softened. "Son," he said, "we never wanted to see you struggle. We just wanted you to understand that struggle makes you stronger." As winter approached, our little family had found a new rhythm. Jennifer continued her regular visits, often bringing homemade soup or helping with household repairs. Christopher and Claudia came by twice a month, sometimes bringing Felicity, who had grown comfortable in our modest surroundings. The girl would curl up with Robert to watch old movies while I taught her to tend the garden. She showed genuine interest in learning how to make things grow, asking thoughtful questions about soil and seasons. "Grandma," she said one day while we were planting bulbs for spring, "Mom says we might be able to save enough money to buy our own house someday. A small one, but ours." "That would be wonderful, sweetheart," I told her. "A house you earn yourself always feels more like home than one someone gives you." Christmas that year was unlike any we'd celebrated in a decade. Instead of the strained gatherings in that enormous Hillcrest Heights house, where conversation felt forced and gratitude seemed manufactured, we gathered around our small dining table with its mismatched chairs and well-worn surface. Christopher had made the turkey, his first attempt at cooking a holiday meal. Claudia brought homemade rolls that were slightly lopsided, but tasted wonderful. Jennifer contributed her famous green bean casserole, and I provided the pumpkin pie I'd been perfecting for 30 years. Felicity led us in saying grace, her young voice clear and sincere as she thanked God for family being together, and Grandpa feeling better, and everyone having enough. Everyone having enough. Such simple words, yet they carried more meaning than all the luxury goods and expensive experiences that had once defined our family gatherings. As we sat around that table sharing stories and gentle laughter, I realized that this was what I had been trying to buy with those 10 years of mortgage payments. Not a house, but a home. Not status, but connection. Not appearances, but authentic relationships. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd had to stop giving them money to finally receive what I'd been paying for all along. Spring brought new growth in more ways than one. My garden flourished under the careful attention I could now afford to give it. Robert's morning walks became regular again as his health continued to improve. Most importantly, the tentative rebuilding of trust between our family members took root and began to strengthen. Christopher's business partnership evolved into a full-fledged company with 3 employees. Claudia's part-time position became full, time when her employer recognized her meticulous attention to detail and quiet competence. They were able to move into a small house in a modest neighborhood, nothing like the grand home they'd lost, but something that belonged entirely to them. "We want you to come see it," Christopher said when he called with the news. "It needs some work, but we're going to do it ourselves." Claudia found these great tutorials online. When we visited their new home, I saw something I hadn't witnessed in years: genuine pride. Not the hollow pride that comes from possessing something beyond your means, but the deep satisfaction that grows from achieving something through your own efforts. The house was small, perhaps 1,200 square feet, with original hardwood floors that needed refinishing and walls that required fresh paint. But it sat on a quarter-acre lot with mature oak trees and enough space for Felicity to play safely outdoors. "We're thinking of putting in a vegetable garden back there," Claudia said, pointing to a sunny corner of the yard. "Maybe you could help us plan it, Mom." It was the first time she had ever asked for my advice rather than my money. That summer, as I helped them design their garden and taught them about soil preparation and companion planting, I watched my family discover the joy of creating something together. Christopher learned to install shelving and repair leaky faucets. Claudia mastered the art of refinishing furniture bought at estate sales. Felicity helped with age-appropriate tasks, learning that maintaining a home requires everyone's contribution. The work was hard, sometimes frustrating, but it bound them together in ways that shared comfort never could. On warm evenings, we would sit on their small front porch, drinking iced tea and watching Felicity ride her bicycle up and down the quiet street. The conversations that flowed during those peaceful hours were richer and more honest than any we'd shared during the years when money stood between us, like a wall. One evening, as fireflies began to flicker in the gathering dusk, Claudia turned to me with tears in her eyes. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "Not just for the things I said, but for the things I thought. I blamed you for not giving us more, instead of being grateful for everything you'd already sacrificed. I reached over and squeezed her hand. We all make mistakes when we're scared or overwhelmed. What matters is learning from them. I was so focused on what other people had, what other people might think, that I forgot to appreciate what we actually needed, she continued. This house, this life we're building. It is not what I thought I wanted, but it is what makes me happy. Robert, who had been quietly observing Felicity catch fireflies in a mason jar, smiled and said, "Happiness is a choice, not a purchase." As autumn arrived again, marking nearly 2 full years since I'd made that fateful decision to stop the mortgage payments, I reflected on the journey our family had traveled. The path had been difficult, marked by anger, resentment, and painful truths that needed to be spoken. But it had led us to a place of authenticity that I hadn't dared to hope for during those dark years of financial servitude. We took occasional day trips to nearby attractions, attended community theater performances, and even splurged on dinner out once a month. More importantly, it reclaimed our dignity. No longer did I lie awake at 3 a.m. calculating whether we could afford groceries after making the mortgage transfer. Our old house, which we had once considered selling to fund Christopher's dreams, became a sanctuary again. I painted the kitchen a cheerful yellow and replaced the worn living room carpet with hardwood floors we could actually afford. Robert built raised garden beds that were easier on his aging back. We hosted family dinners regularly now, our small dining room filled with laughter and genuine conversation. The grandchildren who visited seemed more relaxed, less performance-oriented, more willing to simply be themselves in our unpretentious environment. As I write this, another winter is approaching. The mortgage on that Hillcrest Heights house was finally satisfied through foreclosure nearly 2 years ago. I occasionally drive past the neighborhood and see other families in those grand homes, wondering how many of them might be struggling with burdens similar to what we once carried. Christopher recently mentioned that he and Claudia had started a small savings account for Felicity's college education, contributing what they can each month without straining their budget. It is not much yet, but it is theirs, earned through their own labor and careful planning. We want to be able to help her, Christopher told me, but not in a way that makes her dependent or entitled. We want her to understand that education is valuable because you invest in it, not because someone hands it to you. His words filled my heart with a pride I hadn't felt in years. Not pride in material accomplishments or social status, but pride in the character and wisdom my son had developed through adversity. Last week, Felicity asked if she could spend a weekend with us. Not because her parents needed childcare, but because she genuinely enjoyed our company and wanted to help me plan next year's garden. As we pored over seed catalogs together, discussing which vegetables grew best in our climate, I marveled at how different this relationship felt from the strained interactions of years past. "Grandma," she said thoughtfully, "Mom told me that you used to help pay for our old house and that it made things really hard for you and Grandpa." I looked up from the catalog, unsure how to respond. "I am glad you stopped," she continued matter-of-factly. "That house was too big anyway, and it made everyone worried all the time. I like our house now. It feels cozy." Out of the mouths of babes. That evening, as Robert and I sat on our porch watching the sun set behind the neighbor's elm tree, I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. The decision to stop those mortgage payments had been one of the most difficult of my life. It had required me to choose financial wisdom over emotional manipulation, long-term family health over short-term harmony, authentic love over enabling dysfunction. The cost had been steep, months of anger and recrimination, the temporary loss of relationships I treasured, and the painful necessity of watching my son's family face consequences I could have prevented. But the rewards had been immeasurable: the restoration of dignity in my marriage, the development of genuine character in my children, the creation of a family dynamic based on mutual respect rather than financial obligation, and the discovery that love expressed through boundaries can be more powerful than love expressed through blank checks. As I finish writing this account, my jasmine plants are dormant for the winter, but I can already envision their spring blooming. Like our family, they required a period of pruning and apparent hardship before they could grow into something truly beautiful. The young couple next door recently mentioned they're expecting their first child. I watch them planning and saving, making careful decisions about what they can truly afford. And I am reminded of Robert and myself 40 years ago. I hope they will remember, when their child grows up and starts making requests that tug at their heartstrings, that the greatest gift parents can give their children is not the fulfillment of every wish, but the tools to fulfill their own wishes through honest effort and wise choices. Sometimes love means saying no. Sometimes wisdom requires disappointing those we cherish most. Sometimes the hardest decision is also the most necessary one. I learned these truths at 65, but I am grateful I learned them at all. The golden shackles have been broken, and we are all finally free. That is our story for today. We hope you enjoyed this incredible tale. Share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe for more captivating stories like this, and don't forget to like and share this video. Thank you for being here with us. See you next time.